Hey, how's it going, guys? So let's just continue. This is Lord Lever. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Make sure you leave your comments and answer some of the questions to still help everyone just continue learning. So let's just finish this Kenneth the new book, and then we'll continue with a new book on political theory. So the experience of politics, parties, and doctrines. Participating in liberal democratic politics means joining or supporting a political party. It means taking side about central political issues. W.S. Gilbert got it bang to rights when he wrote in Lolith, "I often think it's comical how nature always does contrive that every boy and every girl that's born in this world alive, it's either a little liberal or else a little conservative." Gilbert was talking about 19th century Britain, of course. In other countries, the names and emphasis would be different. American Democrats and Republicans are perhaps not as distinct personalities as liberal and conservative. On 20th century Britain would require attention to the Labour Party. Further, we must remember that the actual names of political parties are opportunistic, mere names, not descriptions of doctrine. Republicans are no less democratic than Democrats, and Democrats just as Republicans, but Gilbert was right in thinking that in modern politics, liberal and conservative tendencies are basic, and also that everything tends to reduce to two. And why is that? I'm just going to ask that. Certainly not true. Political scientists long accepted the terminology of a one-party state, but only because they were confused. The very word party implies that there must be another party of this basic kind. Alright, I'm just gonna ask a question, guys. It's long accepted the terminology of the one-party state, but only because they were confused. The very word party implies there must be another party of the basic same kind. The essence of politics is debate, and there must be something to debate with. A party that monopolizes power and talks only to itself, like the ruling communist parties of the 20th century, can only be totalitarian, which is to say despotic, and therefore quite distinct from politics. In every liberal democratic state, then there will generally be two dominant parties with several others on the margins of political power, not to mention a host of political sects which sometimes compete at elections. This sketch of opinionated reality of a modern state needs to be completed by recognizing that parties are closely connected with a miscellany of pressure groups, interest groups, vocational organization, public relations firms, lobbies, churches, and any other body which from time to time feels the need to influence the decision of an increasingly ubiquitous state. I think ubiquitous might be large for that. The parties seek to win elections, but this does not quite mean to capture the power of the state. Indeed, it happens just as much that the state captures them. Politics that sound impressive in electoral rhetoric can turn out to be invitations to disaster once the incoming ministers discover their implications. The experiencing of government tends to mitigate the noisy contrast of political debate. For government is a limited and responsible business, while democratic politics is a game in which teams vie for victory. Risks must be taken, there are winners and losers. Favored candidates lose the race to rivals whom no one had taken seriously before, and all this constitutes a spectacle which inspires and enlives partisans. As Edmund Burke, definitely Edmund Burke, I'll be reading more of his political theories because it's a defense of conservatism in the Anglosphere, a very key player in a lot of my writings, so I'm definitely gonna read Edmund Burke. Express the benefits of competition in politics. He that wrestles with us strengthens our nerves and sharpens our skill. Our antagonist is our helper. The basic constitutional point is that the electorate can throw the rascals out. Gilbert thought that political partisanship was innate, and there may indeed be some universal disposition which supports political tendencies. The American philosopher William James suggested that human beings are either tough-minded or tender-minded, and some have thought socialists with the talk of compassion to be tender-minded, while conservatives, who these days tend to support the free market, are tough-minded. This is not a view which will long survive a close inspection of contemporary political leaders. Sometimes the complexities of parties is identified with the abstract issue of promoting or resisting change. And honestly, I need to write down William James's info woman. Here is that while philosophers like William James have these theories. He believes politics is more of a practical pursuit, and people are going to switch sides, and it's much more pragmatic, though that's his interpretation. So we can subscribe to it or not, but it's just something for you guys to be aware of. Sometimes the complexity of parties is identified with the abstract issue of promoting or assisting change. Changes may of course be good or bad, according to judgment, but conservatives have a generalized disposition to dislike change as such, while liberals welcome it. The distinction to turn is sometimes given a biological basis. The young are eager for change, but grow more conservative as they age. Certainly it is true that the young are significantly different in politics, being given to investing their boundless enthusiasm in ideas of social transformation, as did the Young Turks, the Bolsheviks, Mussolini's fascists, and the youthful enthusiasts of the 1960s. This is not on the face of it a reason for encouraging the political engagement of the youth. Alternative parties may identify with interests so that the rich are conservatives while the poor are liberal or socialist. The modern version of this classical understanding of politics derives from the Marxist idea that the modern states are the areas of a concealed war between the bourgeois and the proletariat. This idea suffers from two major disadvantages. The first, that in a war one side seeks the total defeat of the other, whereas political debate, being a form of sport, is a type of competition in which each side needs the other. Just as you cannot play football without a competing team, so you cannot engage in politics without competing parties. The idea of the class war is therefore a covert way of recommending an end to politics and its replacement by leaders who will bring about one true community. The second disadvantage of the idea that political parties merely reflect the interests is that its very significant numbers of workers voted for conservative parties, while many rich and middle class people espouse radical programs, including the redistribution of wealth in the name of equality. Political scientists who start off with the idea have spent a lot of fruitless time scratching their heads over such phenomena as the blue-collar Republicans or the Tory working man. The reality is that politics is about persuasion, and no brute fact about voters rarely reliably tell us how they think or act. This idea will all help to illuminate aspects of a complex and shifting scene, and they mitigate what is most plausible error in the understanding of parties, namely to switch them with the doctrines sometimes called ideologies. Principles and programs are important in politics, but both are trumped by circumstance. This is the approach Minogue is taking, the idea of circumstance and how things are going to change. The problem is that circumstances are so infinitely various that the students of politics is forced to attend to doctrines which at least have some degree of intellectual coherence. In many cases, doctrines is almost the only guide we have as to how policy is moving. In any case, it has an intellectual tradition of its own which makes it worth studying. However, clear one must always be about its limited role in the actual exercise of power. Though I'm not 100% clear on the difference between doctrine and ideology, but it's gonna become clear as I read along. So while divisions into party or factions have always been found in politics, and Cavalier fought Roundheads in the middle of the 17th century, the first recognizable political parties in England were the Whigs and Tories, who disputed each other as enemies in 1679 over the bill to exclude James, Duke of York, from the throne because he was a Roman Catholic. Tories tended to believe in order and obedience, while Whigs, an aristocratic faction, based politics on the consent of limited electorate as expressed in the institution of monarchy, of parliament. Success in English politics over the next century nevertheless still depended largely on royal favor, and it was long before parties became respectable and the institution of opposition an integral part of the constitution. The philosopher of the Whigs was John Locke. Whose doctrines the government must rest on the consent of the governed, and that men have another right to life, liberty, and property, are the basis of one version of liberalism. They were brilliantly echoed in the American Declaration of Independence in 1776, which talked of the inalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Here then was a doctrine which challenged the inherent traditional ways and appealed the disposition to reform both politics and society. The claim to be free from whatever restraints cannot meet the test of reason may plausibly be seen as a claim which has built the modern world, and for this reason the term liberalism has acquired two meanings. First, as a specific political tendency in modern politics to be contrasted with conservatism and other doctrines, as second, as an archetypical attitude to which all modern European politics belongs. The actual name liberalism only came in the currency in the 1830s, the decade of political naming in which socialism and conservatism also acquired their present names. But already by this time, British politics had bifurcated in response to the defining event of modern politics. The grand question was how to understand what became to happen in France in 1789. Charles James Fox, one of the leading Whigs, believed that the French were at last following the path England had taken back in 1688. His friend Edmund Burke thought that the French revolutionaries, deriving their destructive politics from the abstract principles of the Declaration of Rights of Man, were a new and fairly bad phenomenon. They were abandoning the tradition in order to subject France and soon Europe to the brutalities of an abstract blueprint which must, Burke believed, destroy humanity. Burke's response to the French Revolution anticipated all the arguments used in the West against communism. Both the French and the Russian version of utopianism ended by drenching their countries. Burke had predicted this would happen in France long before the first. Burke, in effect, founded conservatism by his diagnostic that liberalism, as a political doctrine of reform, found it hard to distinguish himself from doctrines of social transformation, which in their vain and distracting search for a perfect society would destroy politics altogether. The basic arguments are laid out in his Reflections on the Revolution in France. What further entangled the understanding of politics with the confusion of despotism was the currency of the distinction between left and right. Originating as a metaphor based on the seating of factions in the French Revolutionary Assembly, left and right came to stand for revolution and reaction, two concepts which Burke and other exponents of politics would regard as equally unpolitical. According to Burke, politics is based rather on the concept of preservation and reform, and it takes off from abstract ideas of social perfection but from circumstances of the present. What then of socialism? It arises from the fusion of two 19th century phenomena. First, the idea that society is basically a factory whose products ought to be equally distributed amongst those who work in it. And second, the actual enfranchisement of a new class of industrial workers in the course of the century. Socialism finds its distinctiveness in its concern for the poor, and it seeks to legislate policies such as the redistribution of wealth and state provision of welfare which will equalize conditions of life. It is hostile to luxury and the idleness of the rich. What is that distinguishes socialism from liberalism and conservatism? As a doctrine of reform in modern society, socialism would seem to have more in common with liberalism bent for reform, and indeed in Britain the Labour Party rose under liberalism and eventually replaced the Labour Party as a self-declared party of reform. On the other hand, it was the conservative Shaftesbury who introduced a Factory Act in 1940s and conservative government which after the 1951 continued and extended Labour's welfare state. When in 1985 British coal miners went on strike against a conservative government which wanted to make the mines economically efficient, the Labour Party had been supporting an essentially conservative policy of subsidizing in order to preserve the mining villages. This is a common situation. Parties steal each other's coals and poach each other's supporters as part of a great game of policies, often with relatively little concern for doctrinal consistency. Liberals who used to stand for trade became defenders of subsidy and protection with the so-called New Liberalism in 1890s. Margaret Thatcher's conservative government after 1979 was accused of betraying conservatism and espousing classical liberalism. After 1979 was accused of betraying conservatism and espousing classical liberalism. Circumstances so change the color of politics that what looks to a party like the right policy in some circumstances may look completely different a generation later. One of the most fascinating facts of modern politics is the failure of a successful socialist parties to remain in the United States. And there's a theory, Sean, who talks about this. So it's actually Louis Hartz, and I'll be writing out his book, The Liberal Tradition in America, about him as well. And it's the idea that the US just skipped socialism altogether. The Democratic Party has, of course, adopted many of the policies that would be called socialist in Europe, and liberal, as an American political term, means something far closer to socialist than its European counterpart. For almost any justification of policies will be abstract, and in new circumstances will commit a party to a more than it really wants. When that happens, policy or doctrine, and sometimes both, will have to be adjusted. In actual politics, the formula that liberals broadly favor, reform, and conservatives stick with tradition, points us in the right direction. But no more. In any case, it leaves us with the problem of socialism. In socialism, a tendency no less profoundly entrenched in politics than liberalism and conservatism, we see a movement which transcends the ups and downs of political life, aims at something much grander than politics, a permanent better society. The basic point which we may suggest is that socialism may refer either to belief in a fully just society or to a political tendency to favor egalitarian and redistributary forms when possible. Wherever it may be like a fully just society, we need no serious politics. It will be one of those projects of perfection which we shall call ideologies and which we shall discuss presently. And this is what the term socialism commonly signifies, especially to its adherents. That is why it has acquired a generally political partner, often called social democracy, where the addition of democracy signifies the political commitment with recognizing that the state is an institution that must respond to the current tastes and desires of its members, and therefore that any conception of a finally perfect state is incompatible with the very activity of politics itself. Alright, my friends, so it's the last part of chapter 9, and I think what Minogue is getting at is that he's saying that a perfect society, a socialist society, would by definition no longer have politics, because politics is meant to be persuasive, it's meant to be about circumstances, and it's meant to always have competing parties. So if there's a perfect society, then you wouldn't need politics. And that's just the main idea, but take it with a grain of salt, because Minogue is also a conservative, so it's just something to think about. I also think socialists, and they also alluded to this idea of they taking power, and the idea of them selling out if they start acting democratically. So, and it's just a discussion that people put in about European politics and how when a party, like a radical left-wing party, comes into power, they'll eventually moderate themselves and just play along the game of politics. So it's just something very interesting and something just to keep in mind when as we keep reading these future chapters, and as well when I'll read other authors. But anyway, my friends, thanks a lot. And now that I have the paid version of Screamomatic, I'm gonna be making longer videos. But thank you very much, my friends. See you in the next video. Take care.